one of the central issues we're exploring today is the role of nonprofits, both faith-based and secular, in our civil society. And they do have an outsized role, a feature of American life that Tocqueville remarked on 140 years ago. But the role of these organizations, of course, is more than just as service providers. They provide a way for people in their everyday lives to take part in civil society, in making the functions that we need to happen. So with these issues in mind, I'd like you to introduce yourselves. Emma, why don't you go first and talk about how your work at Auburn Cemetery and Concord Baptist fits into this paradigm, and Ed, the same for your work at the Archdiocese of New York. So Emma, why don't you go first?
And I'm not going to let it pass that he said Auburn Cemetery.
I can't.
That's an old joke. For many, some folks who don't believe in the value of theological education, they say we go to seminary to die, so Auburn Theological Cemetery. But Auburn Theological Seminary, I'm president of Auburn Seminary, and also pastor on the pastoral team for the last 35 years at the Concord Baptist Church of Christ in Brooklyn, New York, Bed-Stuy. And this, not just in this season, but particularly now, this issue of democracy and how we feed it in healthy ways is central to the work of Auburn Seminary and to my work at Concord Baptist Church. And I'll just say, at Auburn Seminary, we're over 200 years old, founded in 1818. So have been a part of every movement in the country since then, sometimes on the right side and sometimes on the wrong side. And sometimes feeding theological narratives that have caused us to be where we are right now, and sometimes battling those narratives. And at my church, founded 1847, and involved in every progressive movement since abolition. So quickly, I would say my role at Auburn Seminary right now is about ensuring that we're sending leaders to the future who understand the role of theology in feeding the common good, in ensuring that this is a multi-faith, multi-ethnic, multi-racial, multi-gender, the multi democracy, which is the only way that it can be a democracy. And so that is our lens at Auburn Seminary. And in my work at the church, it really is more on a granular level. I can't speak for all churches, but I can say for in the Baptist denomination, central to our tenets is separation of church and state and religious liberty. And so preparing people in community to engage in civic life for the common good because of those convictions over the last 177 years or so has been our work.
My name is Ed Mechmann. I'm the Director of Public Policy at the Catholic Archdiocese of New York. The Catholic Archdiocese, Cardinal Dolan is our leader. You all know him from the news. We encompass Staten Island, Manhattan, the Bronx, and then 7 upstate counties. The Catholic Church, as I'm sure you're aware, is one of the largest denominations. We are a huge provider of all kinds of services to people of all kinds. All are welcome in our facilities, our social service agencies, our hospitals. We have a fairly large network of schools, elementary schools and high schools as well. We are, even though we provide those services, we are primarily a church. Our mission is not to be sort of government light, but to have an identity as a church of Christ and to proclaim the gospel, to bring people to God, but serve his people as well. My role is an advocacy and education role. I work very closely with our New York State Catholic Conference, which is the board of bishops for the full state. I support their advocacy efforts. I'm an attorney, do a lot of legislative advocacy and analysis, amicus briefs, things like that. In this regard, we see ourselves very much like Emma as a public witness to a particular vision of society and of the human person. If you have a democracy with moral values left out, all you have is a war of all against all and power plays. And I think one of the most important things that all religious organizations do, churches, synagogues, mosques, everybody, is to enable our people to have a moral vision that they can then bring to the democratic arena. So that's a large part of what we do.
Thank you both. Actually, my next question comes off exactly what Ed has just said. We've had some pretty dramatic policy changes in this country in the last couple of months, directly growing out of the outcome of an election in November. And as I think both our speakers said, religious organizations in particular adhere to a set of beliefs which presumably are not subject to the vagaries and the tides of changing policy views within governments whose control changes from election to election. So my question, I guess we'll start with Ed this time. What does one do when those values, which are so important, seem to be badly out of sync with what's going on in the policy realm?
Well, I think that every church has similar problems in the sense that we never really fit in well with the prevailing government and ethos. We're always at odds on some level or on some issues. You know, depends on whether you're in a red state, a blue state, a purple state, a bit red city, all that stuff. You don't always fit in, and there's always some conflict. So what you have to do is you try to work with the government as much as possible. Obviously, we have to be good citizens, but we have to be who we are. We're churches. And we push back when necessary and politely and firmly, though. But we have to adhere to mission and identity. You know, the government is kind of Leviathan. It will absorb us if we're not careful. There's tremendous pressure on every religious organization to secularize and to conform. And it's our responsibility, certainly church leaders, but I think also our people, to insist that we maintain our mission and our identity so that we can work with government as best we can, but we can also advocate against them when they go astray, from our view.
Same on a lot of that. And I would say one of the things that because our experience with the US federal government has always been difficult at best. I'm trying to be polite. Speaking on what we're doing with people in community is really more of a long game of being the place where people can gather in community to be community and to hear their neighbors and to hear their neighbors' concerns, to organize around the issues that matter to them. The issue that matters to us is that they have the space to organize. They have the space to meet their neighbors. And education, you know, beyond like just who your legislators are, who your elected leaders are, what the process is, and you would be surprised at, just how difficult that is, but also pushing the imagination, particularly in difficult times, about who gets to be included in the vision for a democracy. And that's important for us because we were not included in the original imagination for democracy in the US. And the responsibility that we have then, just like we have had to push and expand democracy and to make that concrete on the ground, is to encourage immigrants and those who are newly coming to the US and who are grounded in community to do their work also to expand and renovate, democracy. And sometimes it looks like pushing back. Sometimes it looks like really supporting and amplifying. But it always it always includes their identification of like how these issues live in their bodies and live deeply in their communities.
We find, for example, how very unsettling it is when there are these dramatic policy changes back and forth. And, you get used to dealing with an administration. New York, because the blue state is a fairly steady state kind of policy from at least the state government and the city government, and you adapt to that and you live with it. These dramatic changes on the federal level, though, are just, they're very difficult for us to deal with. It's like, wait a minute, we were agreeing with you about that. Now, all of a sudden, we're disagreeing with you about this. And sometimes you get a sense almost of betrayal that all these settled things, I would particularly think of our refugee resettlement programs that were settled for so many years and that all of a sudden being essentially eliminated. It's a sense of betrayal. There should be some regularity. And with these dramatic changes, it completely upsets that.
Our next sort of topic, Phil, I think builds directly on that. I made a very facile comparison when we started between what de Tocqueville saw 140 years ago and what we see today. Part of that remains true, that non-governmental organizations play an enormous role in American life in mediating between our political system and individual people. What's changed, of course, is that those non-governmental organizations carry out an enormous amount of what would be governmental function in other societies through contractual relationships with government at all levels. And as Ed just pointed out, sometimes that relationship can become very fraught when the policies, particularly those that have been in place for a long time, suddenly begin to change. And in one sense, I almost apologize for asking this because it's difficult to know what the answer would ever be. And because, of course, it's changing on an hourly basis, it seems. But what does one do when the groundwork for these extensive and important, what are really contracts between the public and the private sector, and particularly the part of the private sector that is related to religious institutions, suddenly begins to change?
Mm-hmm. New York City gave us some experience with local contracting. There was a time when the church had a foster care program, a seniors program. It currently has a nursing home and rehabilitation center and a seniors housing. But there came a time when local government changed and it did not make sense for us to spend our time fighting, and we gave up one of those programs, and that was a strategic move and a very difficult one. The church also had a elementary school that was chartered in the 1960s, I think. And and decided also to close that school and divert that money to a free full-day summer program for young people in the neighborhood. That was also a strategic decision. The appetite for struggling with the federal government, even with the local government as an individual congregation it's not hefty. And Baptist churches are congregational, so not a big, denominational connection there. And but we were able to make decisions that we didn't want to make, but felt we had to make, because again, it is about the long game and what are the resources we have to continue to invest in the community versus the resources that our limited congregation has to struggle, with the city or with the federal government. We've not had federal contracts. And I guess we'll figure it out with this nursing home and rehabilitation center, as so many things are changing now. I anticipate difficult days ahead.
I think what Emma is describing is so important. You have to be willing to walk away. The Catholic Church is very different. We're not congregational. We're, structural. And we've got tons of agencies, and we've been very committed to them. And we are a partner with government. Government is very difficult to deal with at every level. Imposing conditions on contracts, imposing conditions on licenses, very intrusive inspections and oversight, all that kind of stuff. And I guess because we're larger, we probably have a little more appetite for struggle because we can spread it out a little more. But you still actually have to be willing to walk away if the pressure is too intense, and especially if it distracts you too much from the mission. The mission of the church is to be a church. We proclaim a particular vision of God, and we want to bring people to God. We're not just government, as I said before, government light. That's a very hard decision to make. We unfortunately have to close schools every so often for financial reasons. It's very difficult to keep schools open in this current environment, especially urban schools. It's heart-wrenching to do that. We've had to spin off schools and hospitals and other things just because we couldn't continue to operate them consistently with our values. Very difficult. A lot of people devoted a lot of energy and a lot of money to building these institutions. And we don't want to betray our ancestors, but we have to be faithful to the long view, as Emma said, and stick to mission. The government doesn't view it that way, of course. It's their way or the highway, and that inevitably causes the tension.
Mm-hmm. With the seminary, it is a bit different. Auburn Seminary is unique in the ecosystem of seminaries in that we don't graduate students. We haven't since 1939. What we do is continuing education and research and leadership development. But in covenant with the Presbyterian Church USA, we are still considered a seminary and participate with those seminaries that are a part of the Association of Theological Schools. And there is discussion happening now around how will these institutions whose values and missions clearly speak to diversity, equity, inclusion, justice, like how will they hold their mission and their vision? And what I am grateful for is what I see happening across the field, which is that people are really grounding their work in their values. Like, what do you believe? Which is, what is your fundamental belief that makes it so that you are pursuing diversity? Well, then that's what we talk about. that I know some folks are, looking at their websites and calculating their own appetite for, what their struggle would be. But by and large, institutions are grounding themselves in their foundational values and saying, this is who we are.
And I think that's just essential. You have to maintain the identity,
Yes.
and you have to be willing to do that. And the government will always have strings attached to every cent they give you. I mean, we're here, I'm sure there's federal funding to New York Law School. Title IX is here everywhere in every classroom. But if you firmly believe in those values like diversity, equity, inclusion, or whatever you want to call your vision for society and the human person, you have to be willing to stick to it. And sometimes that means, okay, we won't accept federal funding,
Yeah.
state funding. Our elementary schools for example, don't take any state or federal funding. They accept some of the, in-kind aid that they give to every student, like textbooks and computers and that kind of stuff, but no government money, because we don't want to have that conflict.
Yes.
We want to make sure that we are still Catholic schools, just like you want to make sure that you are still Auburn in your values.
We've spent a good deal of time talking about institutions, quite rightly. But what I would like to turn to now, before we have a little bit of time for questions, is your thoughts on what all of us as individuals can do in this extraordinarily challenging time. And presumably most people here are indeed connected to one or another sort of not-for-profit and probably religious organizations. What should we think about? And if I can do a little bit of special pleading, and this is perfect because we have a lawyer, and Emma, in this context, you are a layperson.
Yes. Yes.
Is there a special role for the legal profession in this? And what might that be?
Well, I would say, as we show up for our neighbors, to show up for us. I think the most important and prophetic thing that we can do, that we could do as individuals, is to keep our eye on our neighbors, to be mindful of our own vulnerabilities, but also to keep our eyes on our neighbors. And what I spoke last night at Medgar Evers College, and young people were asking, well, so what should we be doing? And I said, first of all, you need to ask, who are you? Like, fundamentally, who are you in this moment? Who are you? And what are your values? What's important to you? In 20 years from now, I could say that for them, 20 years from now, what do you want your children, your grandchildren to say about you, to think about it? And you figure out how you can live out those values. And in a community where so many immigrants and people from all over the country, all over the world, there's incredible vulnerability. And so individuals are going to be, I'm hoping, claiming, showing up for their neighbors and protecting their neighbors. And just because something is legal doesn't mean that it's right. And so how does the legal community support individuals as they do that?
I think that the legal profession, I think, has a vital role to play right now. First of all, in educating people about what's going on, but also to make sure that people understand that the law has a moral component to it. When we talk about the rule of law, it's not an abstract concept. It is it's a moral position about how every human person should be treated. And I think that's something it's vital that lawyers, especially, we don't just become technocrats who explain to our clients how to do things. We explain why they should or shouldn't do things, and explain to the general public why this is right and why this is wrong. There is still right and wrong involved out there. The other thing I think, again, speaking as an attorney especially, I work for the big guy, right? The church, right? We can always find lawyers. We have in-house counsel. We always have lawyers. There's always big law firms, actually, believe it or not, still who are willing to do pro bono work for us. But most religious organizations are not like us. They're little guys, and they need help too. I spoke to a group of religious-based nonprofits not too long ago, and there was something going on with the state was imposing some regulations that they were all afraid of. And part of my little discussion with them was, okay, you guys need to talk to your attorneys about this and get yourselves squared away. And they were looking at me like deers in the headlights. It was like, we don't have an attorney. We don't know any attorneys. Like, oh my God. Basic not-for-profit law, filing all your documents, getting your bylaws and everything in order. It's terrifying for a layperson. So we really need the legal profession to step up and help those little storefront churches and the little nonprofits, the mom and pop things that they're gathering around their kitchen table. It's to get involved with the law, especially if you're having a conflict with the state or the city, is terrifying. For most normal people. It's terrifying for lawyers too, but I think for most normal people, it's horrifying. So I think that's just the moral aspect of it, but then the pragmatic aspect of it. We have an obligation to help people, I think. And I think the small guy, the little guy really needs help.
It's very interesting in the context of a law school to realize that lack of access to legal services is not something that just affects individuals, but also so many of these very organizations that play such an important role in making society function. And therefore, again, because of their connections to sometimes government at all levels, they need the kind of advice that's extraordinarily expensive sometimes to get. There is a certain amount of pro bono clinic-oriented work that law schools do in this area. It's something we should probably think more of, particularly now.
Just as an example of that, the Catholic Charities runs an immigrant legal assistance network. They have some staff, but it really is driven by pro bono attorneys advising people who have asylum or refugee status issues. And it could never work without lawyers who are willing to devote their time and energy in those very complicated cases, very difficult cases. It's just a perfect example of what you're talking about.
We do have a few minutes for questions from our audience. If you raise your hand, a microphone will come to you.
Thank you so much. This is just so timely and helpful. And my question has to do with this really profound question of, where do you, as a faith community or institution, dedicate your resources in light of massive amounts of pressure? The other thing, though, that it seems to be a factor, or I wonder if it is a factor, is to what degree do you consider, as an institution with a lot of pressure on it, how you appear to the outside world? Because I have to say that I think we still live in a country where religious communities, for better or worse, are looked to as examples. And I can remember seeing a denomination make a decision about stepping back or walking away, as you say, that just was tremendously deflating in terms of, of if these folks are walking away, what hope do the rest of us have of standing up? So I want, if you could respond to that.
So I think it's so important, yes, to be mindful of how you are perceived, and also that you are keeping integrity with what it is that you're actually trying to do. And in many places, we think some religious communities as a lot more powerful than they actually are, a lot more resourced than they actually are, and that many groups are carrying out incredible work with like spit and glue. And I think that, you know, the people who engage those services kind of know that. And I even also, for instance, the experience that we had in making the decision about our elementary school. And it was a moment where the charters were rising, or people didn't have confidence in schools. And also we're sharing the experience with the families. And they're saying, yes, we would be better served if we had a free, full day, full-time program in the summer versus this incredibly expensive and growing even more expensive elementary school. But they were a part of that decision. I don't know that I have and this is just me, I'm just speaking as Emma, not as the president, not as the pastor, but as Emma. I don't know that I have a whole lot of confidence right now in a lot of work. A lot of the positions that religious communities are taking, faith communities are taking, because they're not transparent. And they can't be in many cases. They can't be transparent. And you have to have confidence in your own leadership and what it is that I think that you're trying to do and how you communicate about that. And I know maybe you're hearing the PTSD for what it means to be a Baptist in this time where a significant contingent of the Baptist church has literally taken over the country. I don't have a whole lot of faith. And I would like for them to walk away from a lot of stuff.
Yeah. So that's a great response. And it's a particularly challenging question for the big guy, the church, the Catholic Church. You know, there are some issues that we have been consistent on for 50, 75 years. You know, everybody knows where we stand on the life issues. That's not going to change. But I think we have a special obligation on issues, again, like immigration. I'll talk about that again. We're as polarized internally as everybody else is. You know, the so-called Catholic vote of the people who actually go to church is very evenly divided down the middle. And there's a lot of strong feelings one way or the other. But our bishops, I know, are very deeply committed to this issue, and they are not going to walk away. And I think that's very important, that if people see the big guy, we aren't as rich as people think we are. We are not as resource intensive as people think we are, but we have a big footprint. So I think it's particularly incumbent on the large denominations, the large organizations, to be that way, to stay the course. You know, after, for example, the vice president made some nasty comments about the bishops a couple of months ago, the bishops basically said that, but the bishops, that's my New Yorker coming out, I'm sorry, respectfully pushed up and said, no, we're not going anywhere on this. We're staying the course. But it's, again, it's difficult when other large denominations.
That's right.
Go the other way.
That's right.
And people who we thought were our friends, you know, even on the institutional level, like for example, the Baptists, Southern Baptists have always been our friends on life issues, but now they're really against us.
Mm-hmm.
It's like, what happened? Everything changed all of a sudden. What was our friends, now you're not. So I think it's especially important for us to stick in there and say, we'll do the best we can with what we have, but we're not going to go anywhere. So great question. Thank you.
I want to thank the three of you for this really wonderful discussion in New York Law School and the Interfaith Center. I'm also a Baptist pastor here in town. And as a faith leader, I want to ask both of you, you know, each week I get up to try to give messages to hold my congregation steady. And I would love to ask you, what are you seeing in your work, in your life, that holds you steady, that gives you hope? Because I'd like to take it and use it for my next sermon.
Again, I'll say there's never been a time when, in my context, I've not had to give those messages. because people come week to week, broken by what it means to be an American in the body that they live in. And, but what gives me hope and courage even, and even a little boldness, is that they keep coming. And that their concerns are not just about them, again, but about their neighbors, about their friends, about their country. And so what I say over and over again, like a broken record, you know, one is like, who are we? Let's remember who we are. Let's remember what it is that we have contributed, not just to this country, but to the world. Let's remember how we did it, with joy, with love. And I remind them, you know, although there's a lot of shade and irony and all that other stuff in our foundational songs, the Negro spirituals, there's no revenge in those songs. There's no hatred. There's no bitterness. You can't survive feeding on hatred and bitterness. And, you know, and what is our responsibility, you know, to glorify God? And so what does it look like to glorify God? That means other people have to eat. Other people should be housed. You're not the only, like, the world's not centered around you. And what I hear from our emerging leaders, who are from all different denominations, that the work that they are doing is actually that. They are 18 to 35 years old. I am absolutely hopeful about the future, because they understand, in season and out of season, the one thing we could all be doing together is working for the separation of church and state, and finding ways that the average everyday person can speak to the common good, relate their values to the common good, and they're finding ways to do that.
I'm very much the same. You know, public policies come and go. They change from generation to generation, from administration to administration. But the foundation of civil society, the foundation of democracy, is always how we treat each other
Yes.
on an individual level. And I find tremendous hope in the acts of service and acts of love that are being done by individuals, by churches, by communities, to individual people. I mean, people talk about, like, I'm going back to refugees. People talk about refugee resettlement as if it's some abstract notion. I am a very dear friend with a refugee from a country that was settled here in America thanks to Catholic Charities. And she is a real live person who is thriving here thanks to that. I know so many people who are doing so well and thriving in our Catholic schools. It's that's what matters. That's where the hope comes from, especially, again, from the young people. We've got a very dynamic Catholic young adult world here, especially in Manhattan. And they're just faith-filled and they're love-filled. And that's what matters. It's so easy to get worn down by the politics, you know, but life is not Twitter. Thank God. It's really the one-on-one loving actions of our friends and neighbors. And that's what God loves. You know, governments pass away, but love endures forever.
Thank you. And thank you for this very rich conversation. I work for the New York State Comptroller, Tom DiNapoli, and I am also an Episcopal priest. So this question of how people of faith engage government systems particularly that's where I live. And I'm heartened to hear both of you talk about rooting activism in values and having a sense of, okay, this is who I am. Therefore, that's why I'm showing up on your doorstep to, to talk about what's going on. In my experience, the Catholic Church does an extraordinarily great job of equipping folks in the pews to talk to people and to say, look, I'm a Catholic. Here's where I stand on this. And I don't always agree with what people are saying, but as somebody inside of government, when somebody says that, you can feel the shift in, okay, now I need to deal with this. This is like this identity-based, my faith is connected to who I am at a deep level, is just an incredibly powerful way to get folks in government to listen. As an Episcopal priest, I find often within progressive Christianity, we're not so good at that, and very often, speaking from inside the church, when I view opportunities to equip people to engage, very often the offerings are, well, this is how you lobby. This is how you write a press release. And it's like, how do you do the stuff of secular work? So my question is for Dr. Jordan-Simpson, because I'm interested to know, I know progressive Christianity is an incredibly diverse body. And yet I also know that question for progressive Christians of how do you even say, look, I'm a Christian, that alone is this barrier to advocacy, and I'm just wondering who is taking that on? Where do you see folks helping folks who are progressive Christians to get that deep in their gut sense of what it means to be a person of faith and root their perspective there? Who's doing that, and particularly who's doing that well?
That's a wonderful question. And when we all find the answer to that, I'm gonna let y'all text me and let me know. But I do know, I mean, and not just because she's here, but the Interfaith Center, in talking with people who are engaged with the Interfaith Center, I know that they're engaged with the Interfaith Center because of their values, not because of programs, but because of their values. But one of the things that we did at Auburn Seminary, because this religious progressive left is a very interesting place. And I've tried to pull a bit back from the depth of that because it's hard to hear there. And but one of the things that we did as we began working with emerging leaders is that we created this simulation. We took the data from Project 2025, from just basic statistics about what's happening in the world, and created this simulation where they had to respond according to their values. And it is amazing because what we've said to them is people don't want to hear your rhetoric. They want to know, who are you? What do you believe? They don't have to agree with you, but if they know who you are and what you believe, they can trust to have a conversation with you. So don't hide it. Don't dismiss it. And I think, and one of it's funny watching them engage this, this simulation, because they really do believe that they are saving the world, when really what they're doing is learning how to say, this is who I am and this is what I believe. Even if it means that you're declaring, I'm the daughter of, the granddaughter of, born in, who are you? But also I've had to do that, for our seminary, which there's a way in which progressives, and particularly religious progressives, abandon the place where they have the true power, the place where they also contributed to the mess that we're in, to go and you throw on a collar and get in the street. And I do believe there's a time to put that collar on and get in the street. But if your legacy has been messy theology, you need to deal with the messy theology because you are most equipped to deal with the messy theology. Like, deal with that. That's a contribution because it's the reason why people, not the only reason, but it's one of the reasons why people are in the streets. And they can't do their work if you're not doing your work. And so one of the things that I have had to help our folks get comfortable with is the work of understanding theology and the role of religious narratives and what that has created in our country and what that means for people who are pushing and fighting for freedom on all fronts. But it begins again with, what do you believe? Who are you? Who's your grandma? Where you come from? All that stuff. I don't know who else is doing that. And when you find out, maybe, I don't know, send it out to the rest of us.
We are just at, one of the most wonderful things about a presentation like this is to be really regretful about having to say we have to end. Thank you all very, very much. I want to thank our panelists. And I am very proud that New York Law School is the host for this really remarkable event. Thank you all, and we'll resume in about 10 minutes.